Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, and happy Halloween, everyone! Usually this is a time where people dress up as monstrous creatures, but in a world where even good folk can bear scary appearances, the monsters have to dress up and appear as human. We're going back a lot further than usual today, as I'm taking issue with Amazing Adventures number 16, and a tale of Hank McCoy in the middle of a world-saving road trip, finding himself hunted by one of the X-Men's most powerful foes. Let's see if this old comic makes us want to turn the page, or turn our heads. The cover is actually kind of exciting. Juggernaut grappling with the beast on the roof of a house, berating that he never stood a chance against him, as on the ground, we see onlookers like the Invisible Woman, Thor, Spider-Man, Captain America, Iron Man, and Vision. Hank's up there getting choked out, wondering why his fellow superheroes aren't helping, not knowing that they're just regular people on the way to a costume party, and we're not prepared for this. Though maybe this is actually just some random dude in a Juggernaut costume. The ink detailing around his mouth makes it look like he's got a mustache. Written by Steve Englehart, with art by William Robert Brown, Marie Severin, Frank McLaughlin, and Glynis Ween, we begin with a splash page of an extra menacing-looking beast in the headlights of an oncoming car. Stan Lee presents The Bludgeoning Beast, about to become roadkill. Halloween in Rutland, Vermont, an eve of special delight and terror. That's right, we're all getting Taco Bell for dinner. For there are ghosts and beasts about, and the Juggernaut will get you if you don't watch out. Watch out! I'm watching out for the Juggernaut like the floating Scooby-Doo text said. It didn't mention anything about blue gorillas in the road. The car stops and the occupants exit as the mysterious figure bounds off into the woods, and they happen to be inserts of comics artists and writers, like issue writer Englehart, artist Glynis and her husband Len Wein, and Jerry Conway. More on the significance of that later. They were on their way to a party, but are taking a breather between the shock of what was in the road and the shakiness of Steve's car. Meanwhile, Hank finds his suit and his human prosthetics and puts them on before meeting with his traveling companion and former girlfriend, Vera Cantor. At this point in the canon, his hairy exterior was very new, having debuted mere months before this story in Amazing Adventures number 11. And much like with the Hulk, Hank started out gray before being given the azure appearance we're all more familiar with today. He takes Vera to the Mustang he happened to see stopped nearby and asks the group for a lift. Englehart mentions the problems the car is having, dead heater, lost muffler, though he previously said the car was fine to drive. Don't I know you? Early comics meta-humor. Steve Englehart walked so Deadpool could run through panel gutters. After Hank introduces himself, the name does sound familiar to Steve, but whatever. He and Vera can squeeze in. They drive away, failing to notice the Juggernaut dropping in through a pink portal behind them. He boasts about how he can't be stopped by physical objects, magic, or even time, and now wants revenge on his enemies. But the wormhole just pulls him back in again, into a mystical cosmic void, despite him not wanting to go back. And yet he still prefers it to taking the bus. Thanks to having picked up some magical skills, he senses a voice in his head, which exposits how, after his last fight with the X-Men, he was sent to the Nightmare Realm, where he tussled with Doctor Strange, until Eternity, the embodiment of the Marvel Universe itself, chucked him into the oblivion he's currently stuck in.
Welcome back to the show! I'm still falling!
Last Halloween, the Sorcerer Supreme was brought to Rutland by followers of Dormammu, and his lingering emanations from that event call to Juggernaut, mingling with the beast's aura as he arrives in that same Vermont town, and responding to Kane Marco's life-filling hate. So people just being in a place fuels his hatred, which is what's keeping him alive? I think this comic just predicted social media. Because of this confluence of ethereal forces, and being Halloween, Jugsy will be increasingly drawn to Rutland as midnight approaches, so he can get the revenge he seeks. Steve and the gang have arrived at a motel to drop off their stuff before Tom Fagan's party, unable to bring Hank and Vera since it's invitation only. Not a problem because the two won't be staying long, and as they part ways, McCoy suggests they grab some eats and check out the local parade. Vera insists that they keep on moving, since if they don't get to Canada within the week, the world will die. Hank remembers that, but also that she wanted them to appear inconspicuous, which they're doing right now, And she still hasn't mentioned who it is they're going to see that's supposedly going to result in this doomsday scenario. Does it have anything to do with the Prime Minister's decision to make Colin Mockery a nuclear superpower? Vera says she needs him as a mutation specialist, asking him to trust her and pray that he's as good as she thinks. So time passes wonderful slow, pretty sure they meant wonderfully slow, when the two bump into the creators again. Glynis now dressed in a Supergirl-style costume. Steve mentions they managed to wangle extra invites to Tom's party. If that's meant to be wrangle, it's not often that I see two typos within 3 panels of each other, and this is a 2013 reprint of a 1972 story, so maybe they wanted to keep it for historical purposes, or lord it over Englehart and the book editor Roy Thomas. Anyway, Hank appreciates the offer, but they need to get going. Vera making a joke about not being sure if she joined the Mounties or was a draft dodger, when their new friends are startled by something behind them. What is it? The FBI? No, DC's lawyers. They really didn't like the guy in the Batman costume a couple panels ago. It's the Juggernaut, dropping in and smashing up the floats, talking about the voice that's repeating hate in his head, and how he's able to sense Beast's emanations somewhere in the crowd in front of him. He starts beelining straight for him when he suddenly starts vanishing back into the other dimension. Like a radio station, fading in and out! While rocking out to the hits of yesterday and today, WJGG 96.5, The Unstoppable! He promises he'll be back for longer each time as the clock ticks closer to midnight, just so everyone is aware of the plot conceit at play. After he's gone, everyone notices Glynis has disappeared as well, so Hank sends Vera to check in at the motel and wait, while he joins the others to hunt. Kind of a weird time to decide to bag a 10-point buck, but hey, you're the X-Man. Glynis worries me, but not as much as the Juggernaut. The whole car ride Glenn was trying to give him some business literature that Hank is pretty sure is just a pyramid scheme. He actually figures Len and the others should be able to find her on their own, instead shedding his human clothes to search for Marco as the Beast, able to do so as his shaggy self unharassed because Halloween. As narration tells us the parade is hastily restructured, Hank heads to a nearby wooded area, tearing down small trees in search of the villain, either because he thinks the world suddenly started working on Looney Tunes rules and the Bruiser was somehow hiding behind them, or he figured he could do some spontaneous, free landscaping while he was here. That's when Jugsy appears before him, recognizing McCoy despite his follicle enhancement since last they met. And to see if time has changed his foe's physical might, what does Beast do?
I threw a rock at him!
Hank's a scientist, you know. While still faster of the two, able to avoid a couple of attacks, Beast soon realizes his opponent isn't merely a lumbering tank. There's a tiger in that tank.
What an odd thing to say.
As they make way to a nearby hydroelectric dam, he figures that seeing people pretend to be superheroes as a joke got him going along with Halloween's tame pseudo-terror, believing there was nothing to be afraid of, and his victory in the fight was preordained. If you say so. I didn't really see that in the story before, since their fight only just started, and nothing about their initial attacks indicated as much, but okay. Using his brain, he leaps over a power station to slow Jugsy down, figuring he'll have to try and get around it. But the behemoth simply charges through. Beast then tries diving into the water, but not only will Kane's magically based powers keep him afloat, but the X-Man isn't used to swimming with all this hair slowing him down. On the plus side, maybe you can overpower your enemy with the overwhelming stench of wet fur. When they reach another part of the dam, Kane gets in a solid hit, knocking McCoy onto the rocks below, though not too far below or else he would have been finished. After boasting how the mutant's flesh and blood body would eventually tire, Marco attempts to get the drop on him, but Hank darts out of the way, and with the ground too loose to support Juggernaut, he loses his footing. This gives Beast the chance to make a getaway, put on his human suit, and go to Tom Fagan's shindig. After being chased by a bloodthirsty enemy that's still after him, Hank really needs to just sit and relax. Also, either he ran back in between these panels to the alley in the city where he left his disguise and is only now preparing to put it on, or his clothes just happened to teleport closer to him. Minutes later, knocking on the door and being let in, he's walking among the guests, some of whom appear to also be comic creators, given the conversations going on, which I guess Hank thinks is a better place to gather his thoughts somehow, when who should crash the festivities but the Juggernaut? I warned you I could follow your emanations!
He's got me there.
What really makes this hilarious is that Hank's inner monologue says he didn't expect that, despite the fact Jugsy very loudly proclaimed he could sense him. Maybe he thought the guy was just being colorful. Anyway, he runs up the stairs, then to an attic, knowing Kane won't track him, and worrying this may be it for him. Cornered, he doubles over as his foe approaches, telling him to meet his end face to face. Hank does just that, pulling off his mask and showing his furry face, which is a momentary surprise for the villain, stated as perceived by Kane's intellect, but not his eyes until now. It's enough for Hank to finally succeed in pulling off his helmet, which at this point in the comics is what renders Jugsy powerless. Knocked down the stairs, he says the X-Man has doomed him. Now I'll never win the costume contest! Just as Len and the others have made it to the party looking for Glynis, Beast chases his enemy out the door, with Kane trying to escape by stealing Steve's car. But, possibly because of all the troubles it was having before, it won't start. So Hank tackles him out through the passenger side door. He starts knocking Marco around, saying he's been driven to this, until he notices his opponent starting to look very geriatric. Marco explains that the dimension he was previously trapped in was trying to age him, but his hate kept those effects at bay. When he was defeated, his hate turned to fear, and now he's rapidly aging. Not that the blue nerd could have known. He begins fading away back into that magical abyss.
You sly dog! You got me monologuing!
To quickly die. Nearby, Glynis has finally been found. She doesn't remember where she was, but is pretty sure she had a good time. Jerry chastises her, saying not to get lost again, after all the trouble they went to trying to find her, but she brushes him off, saying Halloween is a time for cutting loose and having fun. Meanwhile, Beast is in the forest, standing in the cold dark until dawn, possibly forgetting that Vera is still waiting for him at the motel. That was Amazing Adventures Volume 2, number 16, and it may be a bit of its time, but still kind of fun. There are parts of the overall conflict which feel clunky or unaddressed. No explanation as to whose voice it was in Kane's head, though that may have been explained in a later comic, or why Hank thought that hiding out in a Halloween party with a bunch of people would have been of any help when he had to have heard his foe declare that he could sense him. Beast also claims the seasonal festivities somehow made him drop his guard, but that's not very well supported. Maybe if there were extended moments of him looking at people in superhero costumes, it would have made more sense. As it is, it never seemed like he took Jugsy's threat frivolously or anything, or indulged that much in the local revelry. Maybe that stuff about Halloween getting to him was meant to add tension to the story, but McCoy on his own, facing an enemy that's given entire teams of X-Men trouble, seems like it'd be tense enough, or make more sense as why he's on the back foot. Anyone who didn't read the early X comics probably wouldn't have known that Beast and Vera were once a thing. Since this is shortly after he got all hairy, it would make sense why he wears the disguise around her. And I gotta say the end felt a tad overly dramatic. Hank is all alone after unknowingly leading to Marco's death, but it's narration that does a lot of the heavy lifting in regards to his emotions. Super-aged Juggernaut explained the convenient magics at play and vanished so quickly there's very little time for his death to impact the reader, though last-minute exposition like this was not uncommon for comics around this time. As it is, this is part of a larger story covered in a couple previous issues of this title, though Vera and Hank's adventure actually concludes in The Incredible Hulk Volume 1, number 161. Beyond maybe confusing the reader as to why they need to get to Canada, these events work fine on their own, so it feels like maybe kind of a filler issue to that overall story. But this issue is also the unofficial first crossover between Marvel and DC. Around this time, in Thor Volume 1, number 207, written by Jerry Conway, Loki and Absorbing Man were running amok in Rutland, Vermont, the same town we saw in this tale. And after this installment from Steve Englehart, there's Justice League of America, Volume 1, number 103, written by Len Wein, which saw the JLA get cursed by Felix Faust and needing to go to Rutland to be saved. While not exactly the first time real-life creators have been put in the comics, the writers of all three featured throughout, as did Glynis Wein, this comic's artist. As for where her in-universe counterpart disappeared to, turns out she was one of the hostages in the JLA book. Also, Faust managed to steal Steve's car. Despite the loose connectivity, all three together would have made for a hefty Halloween review for another year of the crossover. But I can't schedule things for Beans, so here we are. This seems like something the writers of friendly competitive companies did for fun, hence the interplay in their dialogue, and cameos from other creators at Tom Fagan's party. Maybe they were all used to comic convention odor, and that's why they didn't notice the wet fur smell coming from Hank. There is a lot of charm in the meta elements at work, which at least keep things entertaining. The style of writing isn't just with certain turns of phrase or idioms feeling dated in the 2020s, but there's stuff I'm not used to, like reading this dialogue from Marco, usually more of a gruff, aformal type. And sure, there are plenty of apostrophed words that leave out the G and so forth, but here, if you ignore that, he reads as almost eloquent. This is another reprint comic with touched-up colors, so I imagine most, if any, errors from the original copy may have been edited out. But the art is still really good, with great likenesses of the real-life people put in there. Though it's occasionally inconsistent with Juggernaut's torso, the armor at first being very form-fitting, but later on looking more balloon-like, which I guess is the magic armor making him look bigger. Also, I am not used to seeing Beast designed like this. His face is done entirely differently and his hair is much more subdued compared to what I was used to back in the 90s and 2000s before he got that lion's head redesign. I'm not calling this bad, but I don't particularly care for it. I can't say there was anything too spooky about this comic, but it was a nice issue intersecting one story arc and some cross-publisher shenanigans. If nothing else, you can feel that the colleagues involved had fun making it, so perhaps the same is true of the other installments of this unofficial crossover trilogy. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.